Every June, we're told that pride is about freedom. We're told it's about authenticity, self expression, and finally being able to live as your true self. But there's something that's bothered me for years, and it's a question I rarely hear anyone ask. If acceptance is the answer, why do alcohol and drug abuse rates remain significantly higher in the gay community than in the general population? Studies have shown for years that gay and lesbian individuals experience higher rates of substance abuse than their heterosexual counterparts. That's just statistics. Now, before anyone gets angry, let me say something clearly. When I first came out in the late 1980s and early 1990s, I understood the argument that society played a major role in that. Society was far more hostile, rejection was real, family conflict was real, it was for me. Isolation was real, the AIDS crisis was devastating. There were legitimate reasons why people turned to alcohol and drugs to cope. I don't deny any of that. In fact, I lived through it. But here's what I can't ignore. Society has changed dramatically. The level of acceptance today is unlike anything I could have imagined when I first came out. Corporations celebrate Pride Month. Politicians celebrate Pride Month. Schools even celebrate Pride Month. The entertainment industry, of course, celebrates Pride Month. Gay marriage is legal, has been for some years now. Public opinion has shifted dramatically, and yet the addiction problem remains. So at some point, I had to ask myself a difficult question. If acceptance is the answer, why hasn't acceptance solved the problem? If affirmation is the answer, why does the pain remain? If being celebrated is the answer, why are so many people still searching for relief in alcohol, drugs, and other destructive behaviors? That's not a question I asked as an outsider. That's a question I asked as someone who spent years living in that world. I know the culture because I was part of it. I know the clubs, I know the bars, I know the parties, I know the hookups, I know the constant pursuit of validation. I know the search for acceptance. I know what it's like to believe that the next relationship, the next experience, the next drink, the next encounter, or the next affirmation is finally going to satisfy whatever is missing inside. And let me be honest about something else. Sometimes when people talk about addiction, they act like nobody actually liked the substance. They'll say alcohol was just covering up the trauma or anxiety or loneliness or rejection. And maybe those things played a role. They certainly can. But for me, that wasn't my whole story. I liked drinking. In the beginning, it worked. It really did. It did exactly what it promised to do. It relaxed me, it lowered my inhibitions, it made social situations easier, it made me feel better. That's why addiction is so dangerous. If it never delivered anything, nobody would become addicted. The problem is that what starts as relief eventually becomes bondage. What once felt like freedom eventually becomes another form of slavery. And that's exactly what happened to me. Looking back, I don't think alcohol was the real issue. I don't think drugs were the real issue. I don't even think sex was the real issue. I think they were symptoms of something deeper. I think many people, including myself, were trying to fill a void that could never be filled by any of those things, because no matter how much I affirmation I received, I needed more. No matter how much acceptance I found, I wanted more. No matter how much attention I received, it was never enough. The relief was always temporary. The satisfaction never lasted. The emptiness always returned. And that's where I began to question the narrative. What if the problem wasn't merely external? What if society wasn't the entire explanation? What if there was something deeper happening inside? As a Christian, I believe Jesus Christ, the Lord, is our Lord, whether people acknowledge him or not. So I believe God created us and knows how we are designed to live. And I believe that when we live outside of God's design, there are consequences. Not because God hates us, not because he's cruel, but because he's our creator. Let's say if a manufacturer tells you how a machine was designed to operate and you ignore the instructions, eventually something breaks down. That isn't hatred, that's reality. So looking back on my own life, I no longer believe my deepest struggles came primarily from a lack of acceptance. I just don't. I believe they came from living outside of God's will. The more I pursued my own desires, the more empty I became. The more I pursued what culture told me would make me happy, the more restless I became. The more I tried to satisfy myself apart from God, the more I found myself reaching for things that couldn't save me. And this is where I think many Christians unintentionally lose people. They say Jesus is the answer and leave it at that. But what does that actually mean? I'll tell you what it meant for me. It doesn't mean I became perfect. It doesn't mean temptation disappeared. It doesn't mean I wake up every morning feeling spiritual. It doesn't mean I hear God's voice giving me instructions all day long. What it means is that my life has changed in ways I never could have changed it on my own. I could never stay sober. Now I'm sober. I could never consistently set healthy boundaries. Now I have boundaries. I could never consistently walk away from destructive patterns. Now I do. I could never consistently choose obedience over impulse. Now I can. Not perfectly, not without struggle, not without difficult days, but in a way that simply didn't exist before. One of the biggest changes has been in the area of sexuality. For years, sexuality occupied an enormous amount of my mental and emotional energy. It influenced my decisions. It influenced where I went. It influenced how I spent my time. It influenced how I viewed myself. It influenced how I viewed other people. It seemed like everything revolved around it. So today, that is no longer true. I'm not saying temptation never exists. It does. I'm not saying I've arrived. Certainly not. I'm saying I've become I'm not some spiritual giant. What I'm saying is that sexuality no longer owns me the way it once did. It no longer occupies the center of my life. It no longer dictates the direction of my life. And that is what I mean when I say Jesus is the answer. I don't mean that every struggle vanished. I mean that Christ changed what rules me. He changed what sits on the throne of my life. Alcohol used to have power over me, a lot. It doesn't anymore. Sexuality used to dominate my thinking. It doesn't anymore. The pursuit of approval used to drive me. It doesn't anymore. The evidence isn't found in a feeling. The evidence is found in a changed life. That's why when I hear people insist that acceptance is the answer, I respectfully disagree. If acceptance were the answer, the turmoil should be disappearing. If affirmation were the answer, the addiction rates should normalize. They are not. If cultural celebration were the answer, the search for relief should be ending. Yet many people are still hurting. Many people are still lonely. Many people are still searching. Many people are still trying to numb themselves. I believe that's because the deepest issue was never merely social. The deepest issue was spiritual. I believe we were created for fellowship with God. And until that relationship is restored, we will continue searching for substitutes, undoubtedly. For some people, that's alcohol. For some, it's drugs. For others, it's sex. For others, it's money, success, status, or endless distraction. But none of those things we can carry the weight of being our Savior. I know that because I've spent years trying them. What finally changed in my life wasn't finding a better identity. It wasn't finding a better excuse. It wasn't finding a better distraction. It was simply surrendering to Christ and learning one day at a time to obey Him. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but faithfully. And after everything I've experienced, after everything that I have seen, and after everything that I have lived through, I can say this with confidence. Alcohol wasn't the answer. Drugs weren't the answer. Sex was not the answer. Acceptance wasn't the answer. Jesus Christ was. Not because He changed every circumstance around me, but because He changed me. And He's still changing me, no doubt. I'm Arch Kennedy, bold, unfiltered, and unafraid.